I remember you wanted to watch this with me, and I was like,
I was just gonna watch it with you. I wasn't gonna
whatever. And then
no big deal.
I found out you had the questions, and I was like, oh,
Ding.
you've taught it.
Light bulb.
Interesting. And so I was like, yeah, exactly. So I was like, we could do a podcast on it.
I was like,
and
that's brilliant. Okay.
And I was like, I didn't really know if I was going to like the show or not, but I'm like, if I hear it's great, and so let's just keep going. And so we started watching it, and I was like, dang,
was the hype real?
The hype was real. Like, this was legit fantastic.
An adaptation and
cinema.
an execution. Every time I watch
from
it,
the literary perspective, especially,
oh my God, the literary
I can't imagine
perspective.
because you're familiar with the story.
Well, and I feel like what he did is take the characters that are kind of scattered through this novella that she wrote, and he makes 5 of them brothers and sisters in a family that suffered a tragedy, and it's kind of affected all 5 of these children. And we flash back from their childhood to their adulthood, but it's all the themes that Shirley Jackson had. Is the house doing it to them? Or is this mental illness unchecked? That's kind of the question at the end of all of like, why is this happening? And she kind of leaves it up to her reader to find out. And I will say the adaptation and the execution and the themes and the narrative quality and the way they act, everything is done on such an amazing level. When you and I watched it this time, this was my 7th or 8th time watching the entire episode, all 10 episodes through. And every time I noticed something different. And I feel like that is the marker of something that is well done, almost like Shakespeare. Why has Shakespeare survived, these 500 years? It's frankly because there's something about narrative and literature that can be adapted in almost any setting in any time because we're wired for narrative.
Yeah.
And I feel like Mike Flanagan does that. And even though he does it through kind of a secular guise, we don't hear any talk of God. We don't hear any talk of religion, but God's truths are all over this thing.
Oh, yeah.
And his execution of it. And I feel like what a nice way of bringing kind of gospel messages and God's eternal truths. I mean, we do have one character that's a Christian, and she prays for the family.
Yeah.
But other than that, you don't hear any mention of God pretty much. And yet God's fingerprints are all over this story. And I really thought it was fun to watch with a class of students just because a lot of them walked away going, wow, that was really good. And some of them are like, Miss Metzger, I go home and all I hear are the creaks in my house.
Oh my gosh.
And I think of this series. I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. But I will say, my whole point is I don't mind horror and the guise or the lens of horror as long as it has a good message. And I feel like there are certain things that it's like, I didn't really get into horror till later because we didn't grow up watching horror.
Yeah, we didn't, yeah.
And when I met one of my best friends, Mike, we watched a lot of horror stuff I had never seen before. And I was like, oh, okay. And I started realizing that kind of the horror genre, at least for me, it's a snapshot of life without God. It's a snapshot of hell. And sometimes there's hope at the end of that snapshot, and sometimes there isn't. And I tend to gravitate towards the one that, even though it may be set through this lens of horror, God's in there somewhere. And the hope is finding him and the light of that, whether it's through love or the love of a family or forgiveness. There's a lot of forgiveness in this. And when this came out in 2018, it was lauded and won all these awards from psychological associations, from academic associations.
Wow.
And I think some of the resources you actually found today were like from some of these people, like just chewing on this and saying, wow, this really has merit. And I think it was APA, the American Psychological Association, rated it as one of the best things to either teach or bring up in a class if you're lecturing, if you teach psychology, because it has so many elements of mental illness and how we cope with mental illness and what people do with that. And it was very amazing. So I was like, okay, it's not just me that realizes this is a hidden gem. It's like the academic world is recognizing this too. And it actually won all these awards for academic associations that basically saying this is such a wonderful way to tackle mental illness and trauma, and they make it through. That they learn to live with it and to deal with it and go on with their life. And it's not like one of these horrible stories about mental illness where everybody dies or there's no hope at the end. Or, and so The Haunting of Hill House was really lauded for that. And I don't know. That's why I came back.
Well, I would think that it helps that the show's really good. The writing specifically and the acting along with that.
What an
go
art form.
hand in hand.
Yes.
And they do such a good job. All the performances are fantastic. The show is very enticing and creepy and relatable too. There's plenty of aspects in this film that you can pull and just relate to.
The narrative structure.
The narrative
is
structure
genius.
of it is really good. The way they have flashbacks in there, the way they intertwine them with the present day, as well as like providing the context in specific moments. And especially one episode we'll get to later where it's multiple one shots. And
That's my favorite episode.
It really gives Mike Flanagan and the cinematographer to really show their chops and be like, we can do this.
Yeah,
and
look
that
at what we can do.
And we're working with actors who can get up to this level as well. And I just want to talk about really quick, the children who play in this film,
the
or
actors
play in the
and
series,
actresses. So
all
amazing.
the little kids that play the children in
The
this,
younger versions of
the
it.
younger actors are fantastic. I mean, you think of like kid actors and the great ones throughout all time. I think some of these kids are up there with them.
McKenna Grace is one of them. She plays the young Theo.
And you see and you see Mike Flanagan do this again in Dr. Sleep with the other kid actor as well, who I heard great things about. I haven't seen Dr. Sleep. We'll get to that one day.
Most of these kid actors are in Dr. Sleep. Like
Oh,
the little
really?
girl who plays Nell, she gets eaten in the beginning. So.
And the kid who plays Luke's in was it Color Out of Space with Nick Cage?
Yes, and he's
I saw he was
also
in
one
that.
of Wanda's sons in WandaVision.
Oh, that's right. I
That's
forgot.
right.
Yeah.
So it is very interesting.
But yeah, it's really, as a director, like it's really hard to work with kids and make them to get what you need out of them in terms of their acting chops. And these kids kill it. They're so great. They're also just act like kids too. They're super awesome.
Well,
They're
and I
cute.
think he doesn't belittle them like this is
doesn't-
the
yes,
whiny kid
exactly.
or this is the. He treats
Yeah.
those actors like he treats all of his actors.
Yeah.
And their performance really shows that. It really reflects his respect of their space and what they can bring to the craft.
And they all just give the performances overall are fantastic. Timothy Hutton's in this as the
Oh my
older version of
gosh.
the dad. He's great.
And if you don't know who that is, Timothy Hutton is. Go ahead, Jake.
I only know him from Leverage, the series.
He's a character actor.
He's a great
done
character
so
actor.
much.
He's super
And
awesome.
then the one who plays the younger version of him, I forget his name.
The guy who played the kid in E.T.
He was
What's his
Elliot in
name?
E.T. He's
I have
in
it right here, maybe. Yeah, Elliot in E.T. Yeah, what's his? He has very blue eyes as well.
He
Very
plays.
blue eyes.
He was in Gerald's Game. He played a creep
Henry
in Gerald.
Thomas. No,
Henry
Henry
Thomas.
Thomas. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a creep in Gerald's Game. He played her father in the past, and I believe the girl who played Shirley as a child is in that Gerald's Game too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they've all worked together in Mike Flanagan stuff. And he plays like just a loving father in this. He has a wonderful role, kind of a dual role in Bly Manor, and then he's an absolute horrible person in The Fall of the House of Usher that he just came up with last year.
And you can tell that Mike Flanagan and these actors get along really well because they're in every single thing he makes.
Well, it's so interesting to me because he did Ouija Board 2 Origins. And the girl who's older Shirley and the girl who's younger Shirley were in that as mother and
they were
daughter.
in that as mother. Oh, that's
After
perfect.
they did this. After they did this.
That's
So
awesome.
it's hilarious to me. Like almost everything he does, especially the Netflix series, that the Poe one is based around all of Edgar Allan short stories and poems. That's The Fall of the House of Usher.
Fall of Usher.
And then
Midnight
Bly Manor
Mass.
is based on Thomas Hardy. Now he did two other ones. He did Midnight Mass, which was I believe was a novel, and The Midnight Club, which was either a
that's
novella or
right,
a short story. I don't see those as good as the literary adaptation. Kind of like he did Dr. Sleep, which is also a huge novel by Stephen King.
Yeah.
So his way of adapting literature is something like, as someone who's read it, is like, oh my God, Mike Flanagan, I don't know how you did that, but you have my respect for doing that. And it was funny because I had people that weren't fans of horror, and we talked about this during one episode, that you get so, the characters are so genuine and the way they are executed is so brilliant that you basically are like, I don't even care that this is a horror. I just want to see if this character makes it.
Yep.
And I had one lady who was like, I do not like horror, but she absolutely loved The Haunting of Hill House. And she said it was because of the story of the family and the way he adapted it. She said it left you with hope. And I think you said this in the very last episode, all the horrible things that this family lives through and survives, the ending that we get with them together.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Erases all of the horror that
It's
they've been
beautiful.
through,
And
all of the hurt and all the unforgiveness, because they've come to a place where there's hope and there's love and there's forgiveness in the end.
Yeah. So I would and also going back to the literary awards or whatever
it was psychological awards. It was actually encouraged to be taught in
there's so
certain
many
psych classes that were
and
dealing
there's so
with certain
many
issues.
themes of that, and also spirituality, which I love to analyze and dive into this, especially if you like are a Christian or Catholic and you know that the stuff like demons exist, that kind of thing, and even ghosts to a certain extent, like familiars. Maybe not familiars. I'm not saying ghosts are real. I'm just saying
this is not what we do in the shadows.
Spirituality.
I am your familiar. Yes.
And it's really interesting.
I know what you're saying.
I typed in from the Christian perspective, House on the Haunted Hill, and I got a couple things that
it was amazing.
Up.
You had some hits that were not there 5 years ago when I taught.
CatholicStand.com was one I found where it's from a Catholic priest analyzes it, and it was a beautiful write-up.
Yeah,
really cool. And then another website, Bible and Pop Culture, actually did a whole review and a per episode like breakdown, which is what we're going to read today
when we go
through the summary. And shout out to them, bibleandpopculture.com. So they did a whole blog about the haunting of Hill House.
It was fascinating.
And the kid who wrote it is fantastic, and I'll read his name once I get to it. And then Faith and Fandom, they had a quote that we're going to read probably when we get to the last episode, because it's a very he breaks it down really well.
Yeah, he does a good job.
So,
which is nice because I didn't have those resources 5 years ago when I taught it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And then like some of this stuff was written in 2020, 2021.
Yeah. So I read as COVID hit. That was the last time I taught it.
So like folks went in and found this and they're like, oh, this is great. And like, also from a Christian perspective, there's a lot of stuff you can pull and see the translations in their behavior, the grief, the pain, the childhood trauma, that kind of thing.
I feel like psychology is trying to fix mental health issues, emotional health issues, but without God in the equation. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's the world's approach to do that. But what you have to understand is with mental illness, with trauma, all of those things, they don't just scar your psyche and they don't just scar your heart, they scar your soul. And I feel like at least a lot of the people struggling with mental illness, like I had a student who was just brilliant, bipolar and schizophrenic, and she came one day to class just broken up. I'm like, oh my God, did someone die? Yeah. She's like, I didn't finish my essay. She was just like, so like when you hit a high with manic stuff, you're on a high, but when you hit a low, it's like the end of the world. I said, hon, you have an A in my class. Just get it to me next week. Take care of because her husband was going through some mental, he had early onset dementia. And I said, Wendy, you're doing fine. Just do that. She was fantastic. But I've also noticed that a lot of people.
Yeah. What do you notice? What really stands out to you when you teach this when you've taught this before?
I noticed that some people, they don't know what to make of it because they've never seen something like this adapted in a lit class. That was kind of, and Clear Lake was a very isolated place. Not many people were exposed to literature or anything that was like, oh, wow, this is a classic, you should know it, or something. So my approach to teaching is kind of an acquired taste. My goal is to be a subvert.
It's a very good way.
It is. It's an acquired taste. And I always tell people I'm not for everyone. But my goal in teaching these classes, and especially the lit class and an analysis class, they're both transfer level courses. So in other words, you have to teach this as if you're at the university. And my whole spiel as a teacher is I want to teach them things and have skills that they can take with them, but I also want them to think for themselves.
Yeah.
So a lot of my questions, they are a bit of an acquired taste, but I kind of look at this and I think if I was watching this for the first time, what are some of the bigger themes? Because I've gotten to the end of this and I want people to take away with them.
Yeah.
And I really felt bad because one time I had this husband and wife, sweet military couple, and they had lived in like Italy next to the Vatican because he was stationed there.
Oh, wow.
And they ended up in Clear Lake. And like he's emailing me like, I can't email me your essay because I'm at the end of my driveway on a tractor and I can't get you. I'm like, dude, just send it to me next week. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Because Clear Lake, it's very hard to get internet signals in certain spots because we have graphite deposits.
Oh,
and
wow.
so I would just be like, dude, it's fine. So he and his wife would take the classes together because they were offered in the evening. Somebody could sit with their 5 kids. Yeah. And they were homeschooling most of them.
Oh, wow.
And then later when she started to do literature and stuff with them, she pulled out all my questions. And the kids got to live through what I did with him in both the freshman class, the lit class, and the analysis class. So it was really funny. But they both came to me and they said, Angela, she's like, I'm trying to watch the new season of Ozarks and I hear your voice in my head. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, Tuesday. And then he's like, I was watching this country music video and I thought, why is there so much blue? Angela would know why there's blue. And I'm like, oh my God, I've ruined things for this couple. But it's funny. My whole point is I want you to think about things that there is an artistic, I think a lot of people watch stuff and they're like, that was cool. whatever, few scares.
Mhm.
But I feel like there's a lot of art that goes into this
There's
stuff.
a lot of,
and I want you to chew on it.
well, also it's, you want to analyze, and because when people are, whether they're painting the backgrounds of a set, whether they're
The
doing,
details.
whether doing the costumes, whether they're creating the pebbles on the floor, like each decision is an artistic choice.
Most
and
definitely.
it could be a direction from the director specifically, or whoever's the head of the department,
Or their
who's
own
doing
take on it. Their
or their
art
own
is-
take.
yeah, their-
and they're
their
like,
art's
oh, we're
coming in."
supposed to be in a 1400s gravel driveway. What does that look like? Oh, just put regular gravel down. Well, sometimes it's more direct than that. Sometimes it's just whatever. But it doesn't hurt to kind of think, because some people who do that kind of stuff are super passionate and really good at it. So it kind of makes you want to think about that kind of stuff.
There's
It's not
one-
necessary.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's more context.
There's
to what you're
there's
watching.
one point in this where the one character that does believe in God and pray said, I didn't want to come work at this house, but when I heard you had children, I had to. And if you notice in this scene, she's talking to the mother, and she's got these angel wings behind her because of all the statues in the house. And it's juxtaposed with this one ghost that's very creepy and that lies all the time. So you have like a Satan versus God dynamic in episode 9.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of interesting. You don't have to notice that stuff, but it's
Yeah.
there for a reason.
But it's there. And a lot of the stuff you see in this show is very in the background. It's subtle. It's very specific. And it's very extremely intentional from what Mike
Yes.
Flanagan's trying to say.
In fact-
And what he's trying to hide in the background. It's really cool.
I did not know when I watched it until later. I was doing research when I started to teach it, and I found out I believe there's over 120 ghosts in the background as you walk around this
throughout the
house.
10 episodes.
And
huh?
you don't really know. A couple times I noticed, I was like, is that something in the window?
Yeah, something shifts or something.
Yeah, and he'll
Yeah.
specifically add them, and fans have gone through and found
pulled out
all
each
of them.
one.
And there
Huh.
may be more than that. I can't remember. But it was like this huge, and he intentionally put people as ghosts, like they're haunting this house, but the characters don't know that. They
Hmm.
don't understand the danger they're in.
Yeah, usually I love to go and find spoiler casts or like deep dives of this show. And the only ones I've looked up are the ones we're going to talk about today, really.
Nice.
Because I don't want to like, not pollute's the right word.
You don't
but
want to color it.
I don't want to color
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Like, just
or
because like
shade
that,
what you're trying to say.
No, I'm just talking about like, I want to make sure my opinion's fresh, but I also want to make sure it's like, I'm not just copying somebody else's opinion. I've done
Very
that
true.
way too many times in my life. And I finally, as an adult,
And
have
that
noticed.
right there is basically the key to critical thinking. So I succeeded as a teacher.
There you go. Yeah.
But
And you're a good teacher. It's not like an acquired taste. I've seen you teach. You do.
I know, but I look at things from a very different perspective.
Mm.
When I was at Chico State, my area was modern and postmodernism, and people were like, why do you want to do this?
Why?
And I remember going the first colloquium I
So
ever spoke at.
depressing.
I went to this panel, and I was on the panel because I was analyzing 3 plays. One from the 1940s, one from the 1950s, and one from the 1990s. And they were postmodern plays that were very bleak. There was no hope at the end. And I basically went through and I found these elements that I really thought were truth. There was God's truth. And I just kind of look at it through that Christian lens. Of course, I couldn't say that in my things I was presenting at the panel. And I went after this guy that was like, I first knew I was a werewolf and enjoyed killing people when I was 13 years old. And I had to follow that dude. And he went into this whole thing that being a werewolf and hurting people. No, and dad showed up. And poor dad, this was like the first, I just kind of showed up and I'm like, hi, dad. And so he shows this guy, and I could see dad's face like, what the heck?
What
and
is
this
this?
guy like started about like hurting people and stuff. And then I had to go after him. And I went, well, wasn't that interesting? And I had to give my spiel. And the teacher moderating this was just looking at me, and he asked a few questions,
Poor
and then he
teacher.
looked straight at me and he goes, so I'm curious, these plays, and I didn't know one he had written his dissertation on. And he looked at Chico State. It was Matt. I forget what his last name was. He was wonderful. And he goes, so Angela, how did you come up with this, that there's hope with these 2 brothers? Do you ever think they're going to leave? Are they really going to leave the house? And on Broadway, it was John C. Reilly. And I forget who the other one who played it. They were in the 90s. And they were in this play by Sam Shepard. And I analyzed it called True West. And the whole point is, are they ever going to leave like Willie Loman? Are they ever going to have their dreams? And he was just amazed at my analysis. And I said, well, I think, because I looked at the mythos of the American dream. That was something I was very interested in. And he said, do you really think they're ever going to change? And I said, well, I think the lesson you can take, he goes, can you take a lesson away from this? Because it's postmodernism. And I said, well, I think you can take truth away from almost anything, Matt. And he said, okay, then how? What happens to these characters? And I said, well, I think the greatest lesson of this is not to be the characters. That's basically what you don't want to do. And he was like, that is a fantastic answer. But it was just after the werewolf guy, people didn't know what to make of that.
Yeah, they kind of threw off.
Okay, you know, so that was interesting.
That's
but
funny.
I've always looked at things with a different perspective, and for me, it's very hard for me to get sucked into something emotionally, mostly because I'm always analyzing it. But I have to say, this series did that to me. This show sucked me in, and I stayed up till 3 a.m. in Clear Lake watching it, and had to teach the next morning at 8 a.m. And I didn't care; it was totally worth it. And so, but I have to say, like, there is something about good art that stays with you.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I see good art, whether or not you know the signifiers for good art, it's like something in you goes, oh, that's truth, you know, and you go after that.
Yeah. So